You don't want your people to spend and to waste their time on data which is irrelevant. If you don't use AI to do the data check, then you are trying to run before you can walk. So it's like asking 1% of the company to fix what 99% of the company has broke. I think there is a role for AI in data management, but it's not a silver bullet. People have to change how they work and how they think.
Hello everyone, my name is Christian Moldenhauer. Welcome to today's session. I'm Managing Director of Expert Powerhouse. We are Europe's fastest growing consulting network, and we help teams all over the world with on-demand consultants. We're serving more than 200 industry clients and consultancies. I'm super happy to kick off our 9th episode today of our LinkedIn Talk series. And as we have quite a number of participants, I would like everyone to quickly share from where are you joining in today. It's really great to see you. Welcome everyone. And from which location are you joining in? Please let us know by typing it into the chat. So we all like to start our episode, which is going to be around data quality over quantity. We are in the age of artificial intelligence. So everyone has heard about ChatGPT. There are a lot of other tools out there. In this age, the importance of data quality, of course, cannot be overstated. That's why we're talking today. And I see there are a lot of people here. I see people joining in from Warsaw, from Frankfurt, from Cologne. Welcome, everyone. Please keep it going. From Hamburg, Munich, everywhere in the world, we have some people coming in. So data quality it is today. Yeah. And of course, garbage in, garbage out without accurate and reliable data. Any technology that organizations use cannot produce predictable outcomes, accurate insights, predictions, or recommendations. And this is why we have today with us Michael Spira. Michael started his journey as financial economist. He was principal at the Boston Consulting Group and also artificial intelligence ambassador for 7 years. He has a doctorate of behavioral and empirical financial economists. And currently, he's the CEO and co-founder of DQC. And he will explain what that stands for, because no one, I think, is better suited to talk about data quality than Michael, especially as he's aiming to enable, of course, effective data management by involving people who don't have data in their job titles. So without further preface, I would welcome Michael, and also I would keep you interested by saying we have some surprise giveaways throughout the session, so stay tuned. And of course, there is the comment. Thanks for sharing. We have some more people joining in from Berlin and Zurich. Welcome. Please use the chat if you have questions that we can address throughout the discussion that we have. But now, Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Hi, Christian.
Yes.
Hi, everyone.
Yes. That's really great. And thanks for taking the time today, Michael. Yeah. Maybe jump into the cold water directly. Yeah. What does DQC stand for, and how did you end up running a startup to increase data quality across organizations?
Yeah, happy to explain. So DQC stands for Data Q Company, and the Q then most of the time is interpreted as data quality. So the Q stands for quality. And funnily, so you mentioned that I worked at BCG beforehand. Like, I didn't dislike my job there. Like, it was quite nice, it was good work, and it was very interesting to work with different companies. But we realized that we were running into the same problem over and over again. So we wanted to create value with data from these companies and for these companies. And we realized, like, as you said, garbage in, garbage out. So you can't create value with data if the data is not reliable. And then we looked at all kinds of solutions in the market that try to solve this data quality issue. And we thought there's something missing in there. So we identified a white spot, but I'm sure like we'll come to that later throughout the talk then as well.
Interesting. And tell us a bit more. How did that journey then continue? So you found a white spot, you set up a company. What drives you around and wakes you up in the morning?
Yeah, it's really this idea that every company in the world wants to work data-driven. There's probably not a single organization that says, yeah, data we don't really care about. And then like you have those data professionals who really know what they are doing with the data and who can create value with data and who know how to treat data. But you forget like that 98% of the company actually is not so much trained on how to handle data and how to identify potential problems. That was like this white spot that we identified. And we thought, okay, you need to help those people, like the common folks in the office, to treat data the right way. And those are the people that are basically our customers and that we want to support with our solutions. So we don't want to support like the data experts because they already know what they are doing, but really we want to give like everyone a minimum level of expertise and know-how about data and support them in their daily work. So that's what gets us up in the morning.
Great. And so now I could take a bit of an offensive standpoint here. So why is it so difficult? Now we have all those tools. We have ChatGPT, we have AI tools. Why not just give those tools to the 98% of the employees and they just do all this data quality work? So let's maybe talk a bit around the quality and AI. And of course, there are a lot of tools out there. How important is good quality for these tools? And what ways also exist for us and for users to check this data and use those tools effectively?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if we take a step back, in the old days, software was always rule-based. That means like a developer wrote, for instance, if this happens, then the software is supposed to do the following. And that worked quite nicely. Now, with these tools such as ChatGPT, you have AI models and tools that actually learn from the data. So they don't get these if-then clauses, but rather they look at the data and then they derive their own rules, implicit rules at least. And there it's super dangerous. If you feed to those models bad data, unreliable data, or biased data, then the model will not be very good. And this can be even harmful. So one of these applications, for instance, in the healthcare sector, like the models were trained on patient data, but it didn't include data points from Black patients. So the software in the end wasn't able to identify any diseases for Black patients. And that's absolutely not acceptable. And for that reason, the topic data quality is even more important now that we have those AI tools and want to use them.
And do you have some additional examples that you could share with us on those biases that data sets software was trained on and delivered some difficult results? Because I think in healthcare, of course, we have always those drastic examples. And of course, people can die. But in the business world, maybe it's a bit more subtle. Of course, don't take decisions on life and death every day, but still they work with large data sets and driving recommendations from it that then in the end can be quite substantial, of course.
Yeah, another example, for instance, is from the banking and insurance sector. So there, basically, if people apply for a contract, it could be like, for instance, for a loan or even to open up a bank account, then you have these algorithms that assess like how high is the credit default risk, how high is the risk for this kind of person. And if you have a bias in this kind of data set of how you train these models, they will discriminate against certain groups. And that, again, is not acceptable. So there are basically all these kind of issues and potential problems across all industries. So it's really not that a single industry can say, yeah, like we won't have the problem of bad data, because it's all across the board.
That's interesting that you mentioned it, because I would have thought like healthcare, finance, there are sectors, of course, where you see immediately those consequences. But you say it's across all industries, or are there some sectors where especially those data quality issues are more pronounced or could lead to more severe consequences?
I would really say it's really across the board. So there's not a single sector that basically is not exposed to potential data quality issues. Even more, it's not just the private sector, but it's also like the public sector. It's also like when you look at the administration, when you look at regional offices, like they also handle a lot of data, and their data quality is of the same importance as in the private sector. So it's really relevant for everyone, and I'm sure everyone in the call then as well.
We talked a bit AI in the beginning, saying, look, can we make those tools accessible? Of course, if the AI gets trained on a wrong data set, that might not be good. Can we use AI actually also to increase the data quality? Are there any good example where we can use AI to increase the data quality and then also check if AI draws the right conclusions in a non-biased way?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have the right focus, if you're aware of how you can use the tools that exist nowadays, they basically work quite nicely. So one topic that gets quite a lot of publicity these days is something that's called co-pilots that support the users in their daily work. And they basically can see what kind of data a person handles. and then identify, for instance, hey, there's an outlier, hey, there's something weird in the format or inconsistencies, and then they can support the users. So this is like on the positive side. On the side where we still see some big risks is if you take the tools and you skip the step of doing data quality checks, and rather you directly go to, okay, I have this tool, I want now basically to use AI to build an application, and basically go directly to what's the use case, how can I basically automate, for instance, a process. Because if you don't use AI first to do the data check, but rather directly to try to put data to use, then again, you are trying to run before you can walk. And that's a bit dangerous.
So is it a bit like a shift from a paradigm where you said, as an entrepreneur, you should test out a lot of things and you start directly building stuff, but rather you say now it gets a lot more systematic, strategic before using AI actually to think about what data you use and what things you basically input?
Exactly. I think that's a good way of putting it. The first step should always do this quick data quality check. And here AI already helps in the first step, because you will be much faster and you will be much more accurate compared to doing it beforehand manually yourself or trying to identify errors with if then clauses. Then you're much faster to the second step, where you can then try to just build, like the typical in the startup world, you say, build this MVP, try to do a proof of concept, test it out, and then learn from what you have observed. So you're much faster actually to do this, but beforehand, you have to do these data checks.
You mentioned in the beginning, most companies want to work data-driven. Obviously, I think it's the new normal that we have. But 98% of the people don't have data in their titles. So to say, most of the organizational staff typically works with data, but they don't have much to do with the data gathering or the processes around that. But of course, everyone works with data. Why is it so difficult making companies to actually data-driven companies?
Yeah, because if you look at it, how currently companies try to become data-driven, they ask their data and their tech experts to help them to get there. And that's typically like 1 or 2% of the company. So it's a bit like asking 1% of the company to fix what 99% of the company has broken. This will not work and this doesn't work. And for that reason, our hypothesis is very much that you need to involve all employees in the data management, because basically every office worker to some degree has to work with data and with systems that are connected to data. And every office worker has some expert knowledge about data. And basically they need to be involved and give their contributions, which might be small, but they add up. If you have 98% of the company contributing a little bit, this adds up to much more than if only 1 or 2% of the company tries really hard to fix data problems for the entire organization. And therefore, you need to involve everyone, even the people who don't have data in their job titles.
And I find it super interesting. So, do you have any examples of how that involvement could look like? So, is it people telling the tech people, or you have regular workshops with them? So, what would be good examples to substantiate a bit that's collaboration that you mentioned, or that contribution from the 99 and 98% to the 2%?
I would say it's a journey. So at the beginning, you have to start by identifying like who are the people in the organization that might play a role with data. And this is like really almost everyone, at least if we talk about the office staff, about traditional like white collar workers. And then for these people, you need to make sure that you have like a basic understanding for what is data, why is this important. They might be doing their job for 20 or 30 years, and suddenly this data topic and digitalization is becoming so relevant that they need to understand like how this might affect their work and how they are contributing and how their work contributes to a data-driven organization overall. So you need to establish this basic understanding. And this means setting up like a basic data literacy program. And then for each job profile, the next step is to identify how sophisticated basically needs to be the understanding of that person and how much data know-how does this person require in order to fulfill their job in the right way. So that way, basically you build up this journey and then you start training people and helping people that they can assume their responsibility and fulfill their role and contribute to this data-driven organization. But it's really like per job level, you need to identify like what level of understanding is required, what skills are required, what tools are required for that person, and make sure that they have the proper training and the proper tools at hand.
And when you talk about that, of course, there's different sizes of organizations. But if we assume let's have a medium-sized company here in Germany, how long would it basically take to get that involvement of the organization and to bring everyone on board and really sensibilize everyone on data quality?
Typically, it's a journey that takes many months. So I would say 6 months is not unusual. But what is important is that it doesn't take 6 months until you see first results. So you should start somewhere very small and basically show that if you start in one department, in one team, that generate better outcomes, not just for the company, but overall as a team, but also in terms of like how happy they are in their jobs because they understand what they are doing. They can work more effectively and faster. And start small, do the small success, basically lighthouse example, and then communicate around this kind of lighthouse and start to build up more of these lighthouses and engage more and more the rest of the organization. But as I said, 6 months is not unheard of. Sometimes it takes a year because like it's really also upskilling, reskilling some of the people. And this takes, of course, a bit of time.
And so I find it super interesting. We get into it a bit more detail later also, because I would love to hear a bit also how you deal with resistances in these cases. But we thought we might keep that session also a bit practical and to engage with the audience. If anyone has some questions at this stage, please feel free to put it in the comments. So let us know so we can either directly address it or later in the Q&A section. But what Michael and I have thought in the beginning is to show an example of practical work that comes typically around in the work of an employee sooner or later. So it's a data set that typically people have. Of course, everyone works on systems, but a lot of work still takes place in just plain Excel files where data is analyzed, merged together, multiple people work on those files. So I think everyone has seen it. So Michael will pull up his screen in a second. Yeah? And we also have a guessing question for everyone joining us today. Yeah, we would like to ask you, and you cannot know the answer, yeah, but we'd like to have your estimated guess of in that data set that you see here, yeah, what would you expect? How many anomalies would you see there? Just put your best guess number in the chat, and the people that answer closest to it will have the chance to get a free license for DQC. Yeah, please put it in the chat right now, and Michael will, in the meantime, I guess, go a bit through what the data set looks like, but we're also going to have a quick intro how to analyze anomalies there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Christian. This example, while you are trying to guess like how many errors there might be in this data set, it's just an example of the kind of data people often have in Excel. So here you see some financial data that records revenues. And you see here that we have like a booking date, we have a recording date, so some date formats. You have a number, which could be, for instance, like a receipt number, a short description, which is anonymized in this example, and then further information about these bookings. And then at the end, you have a column which lists the currency and then the actual values historically, but then also as a forecast, plus some further identification number for the tax part of the company. And this, as you can see, it's an example where people work with the kind of data. I'm just zooming in so that you can see it a little bit better as well. And that, yeah, if you receive this data, for instance, from a system, or if you receive this kind of data from a colleague, or if you have downloaded it maybe from the internet, before working with this data, of course, you need to make sure that you can trust the data. So a lot of times people jump to, yeah, let me do an analysis very quickly and try to get some insights from this data set. I finally got it. But beforehand, you need to check essentially, can I trust this data? Is there something wrong with it? Do I need to consider certain exceptions or so? And we are asking you basically just to shoot a number for how many errors you would expect in this kind of data set. So if we look at it, we have 39 rows of data, and the columns go from A up to Q. And this is like the kind of data set, and it's not even like a very big data set. So it's something that for many standards, you would say, yeah, that's even rather small. How many errors would you expect in such a data set? And what kind of errors would you be looking for?
Please put it in the chat. Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting one. Of course, you cannot know the right answer. We will reveal it also. Yeah, but take a guess. How many data issues are in there? Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 1,000? Please put your number in the chat.
In the meantime, we just give you a moment and we can tell like a couple of stories about like some of the some of the things that we heard or found in some organizations of data issues that they identified. So for instance, there was one example where in the Excel file, they were keeping track of banking transactions, and they had a problem of actually having right IBAN numbers in there. Plus, of course, the number of digits and the different currencies wasn't closely monitored. And this led the company to actually making bank transfers in the wrong currency sometimes. And this is quite costly because they had to reimburse some of their customers, and they made like reimbursements which were not of the right order of magnitude. So it can be quite costly for companies if they don't do these kind of data checks, for instance.
Yeah, and I think it's great to check the data. One number we have, 39. Everyone, please put in the chat your best estimate. Michael, what I wanted to say, I can really relate to that feeling as a consultant, maybe. You get the data from the client and you want to produce an analysis because maybe also your project leader or your partner even wants to see some analysis very quickly and to drive some hypothesis from it. But really having that first step of cleansing the data, analyzing it for anomalies, and that is, of course, super important. Yeah. I think if you don't get further numbers so far, 39 is the answer. And we can go ahead and maybe also have a look into what type of anomalies we find and in what categories maybe it's also interesting to think about when you go and check the data quality.
Exactly. Happy to do. And then I will share the screen again. So basically what you have to do here is essentially go manually through this data or write your own formulas and try to run some data checks in order to make sure that you can trust the data. And that's just one example what we try to standardize with one of our tools, which is this Excel add-in. And I will just use it very quickly to run an analysis on this data set. And like for what kind of errors from our point of view, the business should check data for before using it. So you should check like, okay, do I have some missing values? Do I have some inconsistencies, for instance, in the format or in the unit? So if we talk about inconsistencies, everyone who has worked with Excel knows that the date format is always very hard to handle. And that's one thing where, for instance, you might mix up like Western Europe format with an American format, and they switch basically the day of the month with the month. And having inconsistencies in there can be quite costly, or the currency example that I made early on. Then outliers is also quite interesting as well, because maybe when importing the data set, like a comma was missed or a dot was interpreted as a comma. And then again, a lot of times you get data issues from there. I think everyone has experienced the problem of duplicates. So maybe you're double counting a customer reference or like a revenue booking, which would be horrible if you think about it from an accounting point of view. And then you also see that in principle, you should check for formula errors. Now, this sheet doesn't have any formula errors. And then potentially you might want to look for sensitive data, which is PI data. So to answer the question, what we found in this data set with this add-in is essentially there are 5 really severe issues in this data set, and there are 17 minor issues. So the answer for this data set is actually 22 data errors. And I can tell you, like from experience, there are many files where we find hundreds, if not even thousands of data issues. So it's really something that is quite important to check. Plus, one thing that's also important to remember, and that's what we always tell our users, when doing such a data check, it's not a bad sign if you don't find an issue. It was good that you checked the data. The tool might tell you, look, I have 0 issues in the data set. That's great. You can go ahead and use the data set, because sometimes people are disappointed. I used this tool and I looked for issues, but I didn't find an issue. Your tool is broken. No, maybe your data is perfect. And that's also something like it should be a very quick check. And that's why we built this kind of little helper. But I think that gives you a bit the story, like what kind of data issues you might want to look at in a data set.
That is really great. And thanks for sharing, Michael. Yeah, I think it shows that you can in seconds get first hypothesis on the data and identify issues. So we got a question in the comments where I think it probably has to do around how you gather the data. One user said it depends much of organizational culture noticed on customer master data cleanup. Yeah? Get it right the first time, or someone in the shared services will see it later. Do you have any thoughts on that? What's the best process, maybe, to get the data into your systems?
Yeah, I think the user is describing like a great point here. If you want to become data driven as a company, it's not just that you give someone a tool and suddenly the entire company will be data-driven. It's really this culture change and this establishing this data culture that takes a lot of time and that is important. There's also the saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And this is really true in the context of data, because if you are able to have a data-driven culture, you are in the right mindset to say, I want to put the right data in the first place. So this first time is exactly the right approach, because if everyone is assuming their responsibility of putting the right data in, then you don't need the shared service center later on to fix all the problems, because a lot of times they don't have the domain expertise to fix the problems in the first place. Then, of course, I said you want to have the right data and the right data quality in the first step. For that, you have to define like what data is important to me as an organization, and also how do I define good data quality? Because you don't want your people to spend and to waste their time on data which is irrelevant. It's very important to prioritize.
Yeah, and that is an interesting question, because of course going through everything and correcting everything, unless you have it first time, can take a lot of time. So how to manage those trade-offs best? On the one hand, you say, okay, I want to have the best data quality to make the best decisions based on that. But on the other hand, I have limited resources and I need to prioritize. And I want to maybe also have a lot of data to analyze. Yeah, so data quantity, of course, could be also in the equation there.
I think that's a great question. So what you're supposed to be there is, first of all, map out what data assets do you have. And that means, what data do I have as a company? Like, for instance, in finance, what data do I have in sales? What data do I have in operations? And really make essentially a map where you can zoom in and always see how much data do I have on the next level. And then you can zoom out again. And once you have this transparency, then you need to look at, for a given use case that is valuable to me, what data assets do I require? And then basically you have this use case, you know what data you need for this use case. And then, okay, I need to improve first the data for this use case. And hopefully you set this all up in the right way so that the use case has some value to it, so that you can measure and communicate later, like how much value was generated by improving the data quality that is required for this use case. So it's always important to think about what's the value of all of this, because sooner or later, you will get into this discussion as a company, like, why are we caring about data quality? Well, you will only care about it if it generates value. And value doesn't only have to be like financial value. It can also be like faster time to market. It can be like employees waste less time and they enjoy their job more because they don't have to manually clean data or ask colleagues for the right data. So there are like many facets to what value can be.
So as an advice maybe to independent consultants, how do you best find those pockets where you can create value? And then I have a question for you also on the executives, of course.
Okay, the pockets of value, they are quite distributed. I would say a lot of times they are not so much in the internal facing departments. The value pocket, for instance, is frequently if you look in the sales area. Like there, a lot of times it's quite easy to make a case for, okay, if we have better data for this, we can do more cross-selling or we can do better price optimization. So there it's quite nice because you are close to the top line, and therefore it's quite easy to have a value pocket which is significant. On the other hand, if you're really close to a cost bucket, for instance, in the procurement area, there it's also very easy to then show value if you think that you have a data quality issue.
Great. I think there are some cool examples looking at the top line and looking at the bottom line. Now, if I put myself a bit in the shoes of an executive, I have a lot of topics on my mind. Now is a data quality that I also need to take care of, but we have done things anyways over the last 10 years the way we did it. And we have a robust, I don't know what, Excel, SAP, whatever data we use, systems in place. Yeah. What are some of the biggest resistances that you see, also making, of course, company executives aware, but also consultants aware? What are the biggest resistances that you see when it comes to improving the data quality in the company?
I think you already asked a question which went in the same direction. And like the biggest resistance to taking data quality seriously is this: people have to change how they work and how they think. This is like the hard part, because if you simply continue doing the same thing as to how you did it before, nothing will change. Like just because you installed a tool on your computer, it won't help you to solve data quality issues. It only helps if you make use of the tool, if you put it to use. And for that reason, you need to think about your processes and also your way of working, and really think about how can I incorporate data quality into processes and the way of working. And this is where the resistance then comes from. And for that reason, it's so important, because an executive will always say, but if it generates value for the company, I take it seriously. And therefore, it's always this: measure the impact, measure how much time do you save if you do this the right way, measure how much more revenue you can make if you do it the right way, how much your net promoter score improves, for instance. Always find the metric of how you can measure the value of data quality.
Thanks. Yeah. And so, as an advice to executives, how would you motivate your employees in the organization to drive that forward? And how often also would you check in typically on data quality topics with them? Is it when you drive that change process? Is it that you have a meeting with the employees once a week and discuss on how they use the tool? Do you actually measure how often people use the tool and then put that as a transparent overview to every employee and basically award the ones that use it most? Or what are some typical examples in the practice?
That is a cool example that you gave, because actually it works quite nicely. The one thing that you can do is you want to motivate people. And one thing that motivates people is actually if you put in a bit of gamification, if you make it a bit competitive, then people might enjoy it very much, and even more than you might think. So one thing that we did with one of our clients is that for every data correction that an employee was doing, they received points. And after a couple of months, they were able basically to redeem their points and then decide how the company will invest basically the points, for instance, to plant trees or to give money away to a charity. So it was like for the public good. And this was like super motivational for the people, because they realized, okay, first of all, it's being measured how I'm improving the data, but also I'm doing something good by improving the data, not just for the company, but also indirectly. One thing in particular in Germany that you need to be really careful is you don't want to measure performance of an individual. So it needs to be, in German, you would say like Betriebsrat conform. So you are not actually making it public, like who is leading the board of improving the most data for the quality, and the flip side, blaming people who are not contributing. We didn't make this transparent. It's completely anonymous. And then only like a respective person sees whether they are basically above average or below average, but it's completely anonymous. And for that reason, then it's quite motivational if you see, hey, there are colleagues that are contributing more. I also want to do more. And then having this kind of reward at the end, if you can go home after a month and say, I planted 2 trees by improving data, that's a cool story.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. And I think with that, we've discussed so many ideas. Let's turn over also to the audience one more time and ask for questions. Yeah. Guys, anything that you would like to ask Michael while we are running our session today? So we have some questions here also for our Q&A session, because just looking into the time, I think we could speak for 2 more hours easily. Yeah. We had some questions that reached us before the talk. Yeah. And maybe to start it off, one question was, what advice do you have for companies just starting to invest in data management and quality initiatives? How can they ensure that they're making the most of their investments?
Yeah, I would say like it's 3 elements for these companies. First, identify where and what data matters most to you. The second then is to start small. Select a small use case where you actually can show the value that comes out of improving the data quality and improving the data management around this data asset. And third, only then you want to start rolling out data management and data governance to the rest of the organization. But it's really first identifying where it matters, second, starting small, and third, only then roll out and communicate around this small showcase that you were able to do.
Thank you. And another question that reached us, it's more around AI. So could generative AI be used in data management? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think there's definitely some areas how you can apply it. Generative AI is disrupting essentially all industries, and it will also disrupt the data management and data governance industry. So for instance, one application I can think of is like a lot of times you have to document data sets and describe them so that they are then stored, for instance, in a data catalog. This, for instance, could be done with a generative AI algorithm. The other thing, and this is a little bit what I showed you in Excel as one example, is where AI can serve as a co-pilot and support users and warns them about potential data issues in their data set. So that can also help that everyone has like a basic level of data literacy. Again, like it's super important to be aware of the limitations of generative AI. So there are some examples for ChatGPT where the system was giving responses which are just plain wrong. And you call this like hallucinations, because generative AI, at the end of the day, it's simply a probability model. And a lot of times it's impressive what it can do, but at times it's just completely wrong and unaware that it's making mistakes. So I think there is a role for AI also in data management and to support, but it's not a silver bullet. So it still requires basically people to understand what they are doing.
Any questions, again, to the audience, please put them through in the comments. Happy to take them up. Maybe as one question, and maybe even the last one, nicely ties to the generative AI topic. How do you see the field of data management evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? Will we see a lot more tools? Will we see a lot more technologies? Because I think it's also difficult for people in the tech departments, for users, because of that multitude of things happening to keep up. What's your prediction there of the development, and how should people be best prepare themselves to keep up?
Yeah, I think for the field of data management, if we look at the current trends, like there are at least three things that come to my mind. The first one is data management will gain even more attention and even more importance, because you want to do the fancy stuff that is possible if you have data at hand. But in order to be able to do the fancy stuff, you need basically to first get the data right. And therefore, data management will be even more important. The second thing is that I strongly believe that data moves away from a topic for tech experts to becoming a topic for everyone working in the organization. Like this is really the strong hypothesis. Everyone needs to play their role in a data-driven organization. It won't stay like a topic only for the tech and data nerds. And thirdly, due to that, co-pilots will play a bigger and bigger role because we need to support people. And I think interestingly, and maybe a philosophical discussion, is then whether AI is the co-pilot to the human or whether the human becomes the co-pilot to the AI. But I think this, the future will tell.
I think that is super interesting. We should maybe can have another LinkedIn Live discussion about it in a year. So there was one more question coming in, and thanks for raising it from a LinkedIn user. I noticed on some transformation projects, people try to delay things, but making it complicated. How do you deal with it when facing them on site every day? Yeah, we had this example of benchmarking that you mentioned, making it transparent that people are working more, people working less with that quality topics. But also maybe you face people afraid of losing position and about restaffing. How do you deal with those issues?
I think you need to take this change very seriously. If, for instance, you run a transformation project, like for instance, a consultant will be very much aware how important it is to have this work stream that does change management. And it's really at the heart that you communicate and that you take away the fear and that you explain to people in what way they benefit from it. Because a lot of times, if they work in a data-driven way, if they assume their role and contribute to a data-driven organization, their jobs become easier as well. But this is super hard to understand, and this is very difficult to grasp for them. So it's really important that the leadership understands like that it's a transformation for every employee and that it cascades down and everyone communicates strongly about why are we doing this and how will this help all of us, and take concerns of employees very seriously. Because you don't want them to basically grow and then suddenly everyone is anxious, as you mentioned this in this comment here, because you're worried that you might lose position or get restaffed. So it's really important to communicate strongly and emphasize the message from the top and cascade it down.
Very good points. Michael, I see there have not been additional questions coming through. So with regards to time, I would also say we close it here. Yeah, it's been a really great session. Michael, thanks a lot for taking the time today. This was super new and informative topics. And I learned a lot about data quality. So anyone having a question, of course, feel free also to reach out to Michael and to DQC later on. Yeah. I would like to thank everyone for being with us today. Thanks for joining in. And of course, there are more sessions planned for the future, so don't miss out. And also follow us on LinkedIn by just hitting the little bell on the account. I'd like to say thank you for joining us today and have a successful day. Take care and see you soon. Bye-bye.